got all these ideas down. We're going to be kind of using these ideas to do our next experiment. Fungus. Great. So we're going to be using yeast as kind of our model fungus to test out some of these ideas. What are we going to need to provide our yeast with? Kelly.
Water.
Water? Why water?
Well, a lot of times it's kind of moist.
Great. So you see fungus in moist areas, and also it's a requirement for all living things. Great. So we're going to add water. Anything else we might need to provide this fungus with? Yeah, Joe.
The nutrients?
Some nutrients, yeah. So we're going to be looking for some nutrients to allow the yeast to live. So it has something to eat, and it has water as well. So we're going to be using something called a starch solution. I'm going to be mixing some starch with some warm water, and you're going to be growing some yeast in a flask. So let's start activity 45, and we'll talk about how we're going to go about doing that. A little more. What do we just add? Yeast, yeah, and yeast is our...
Sometimes you can use yeast to put in, like, for a recipe and for waffles, and so they'll eat and then it will make the waffle rise.
It'll make it rise.
That's what it's doing.
So you think that it's, well, when you're making bread and you cover it, I mean, you see that it's rising. What's rising now? What's inside of that dough or whatever is rising?
There's like tons of air in there.
So when you like look at it microscopically, you see some air in there?
Yeah, and then you squish it out.
Where's that air coming from?
Is it the waste of the yeast?
It's just a what?
The waste of the yeast.
The waste of the yeast?
No, well, when they belch, it brings up air, so whenever you cook it, it'll raise.
So you're saying that the air inside of the bread makes the dough kind of rise a little bit?
Yes, from the yeast. It can still belch, and then it basically lifts up air.
Yeah, these are great inferences that you guys should add into your journal here. So you guys are talking about air being inside of the yeast or being produced by the yeast as some kind of waste. That sounds great.
I think it's like eating the starch, and then like its waste is like the air that's blowing out of the balloon. So
Waste is gas.
Like a chemical reaction.
Either that or it's burning.
well, because obviously there's like more air blowing it up than before.
Or like,
And there's bubbles on top of the water.
or have you ever noticed how like, have you guys ever did that thing where it's like the vinegar and the baking soda thing? Yeah, well when that happens, like it just foams up, right?
They aren't fungi, it's just a chemical reaction.
Yeah, I know, but that could be a chemical reaction too.
Well, no, that's a chemical reaction.
I know, but it's not like really the fungi eating.
I just like
Hey, it's thick now.
Breaking down the starch
Yeah.
whoa,
making
You killed. Whoa,
Dude,
that was weird.
that was cool.
no, but
So why is there more air in there now?
Because of the chemical
well, I
reaction.
think there's probably like less starch because like the fungi ate it, and then
Well, it's trying to go away,
waste
but the
from
problem is there. So
yeah.
Yeah. Like when a bubble pops, the air has to go somewhere, but if it's just in a little ceiling thing, it goes up to the top and rises into the balloon.
What is that yeast doing in there?
It kind of looks like it's rising.
The yeast, okay, so can you give me some evidence for why it's rising?
Well, there used to be the yeast like on the top of it, but
Okay.
now it's like foam.
Now you see some foam too. So now we know that. What else is the yeast doing in there?
Like, breaking down.
Possibly, yeah. Because we talked about that. So as it's doing that, why is it doing this process? We talked about this whole idea. We have all these ideas jotted down. Why is it doing all this? It sounds like kind of a complicated thing.
I don't know. Well, the yeast like doesn't eat and it die. Well, if like the yeast didn't eat the starches, wouldn't it die or something?
If you didn't eat it, would it die? What do you think?
Yes,
Why?
because if it, like we had no nutrients or any food, we'd all die. So probably fungi was the same thing.
So what does it use?
So I would just watch it blow up.
It's dangerous.
So why do we think that it's bubbling?
It might have like chemical reaction, like when
They keep clumping together after you shake
when
it.
the two mix, or maybe it's because we're shaking it.
Yeah, so you can
You shake a soda can, it shoots out, but there's something to stop the air from shooting out, so it goes up and tries to get out, but it can't.
Or maybe seeing as because like we didn't shake it, still have this line going up. It's like the digestion thing, the enzymes going up. As the process goes on, more go up, and it's just filling up the balloon because there's nowhere else to go besides the starch thing.
Why is this?
I think you're just drowning in it.
Yeah.
And
Well, there's starch in there. It's like eating the
what was
starch
the other thing in there?
and producing
Water,
gas
what else
is like
was
a
it?
byproduct.
And the yeast?
Yeah, so like when yeast and starch
I
and
think
water
it,
mix, it combines
So the
chemical
fungi
reaction.
is starchy.
I think it's eating the
So I think-
starch and then the inflation is just a byproduct.
Maybe. So when the starch is,
Like when
the fungi like eats the starch, it starts gives oxygen out. Maybe. And fungi eats the starch, it gives oxygen out. Maybe that's what it is.
Okay,
I don't know if it's oxygen, it could be hydrogen, nitrogen, or something.
I think it would be oxygen.
That probably wouldn't be nitrogen.
What do plants produce? Yeah, so I think that's it.
Well, we could try lighting it on fire.
You could just, no, Avery, no, we're not doing any of that. So just write it down.
So we have the starches and then the water, and then the fungi eats the starches and it makes it into simple sugars, which is extracellular digestion, which produces oxygen. That's why that happens, right?
Yeah.
You should write that down.
Can someone just quickly summarize what we did yesterday? Yeah, Ransom, go ahead.
We took yeast and hot water and starch. We put it into a glass bead, and then we put a balloon on top of it and take observations and entrances.
Great, yes. And so what I'd like you to do is for the first 5 minutes of the period, I'm going to have you take a look at your balloons one more time. Note anything else that you can add to your observations and inferences. Because I know a lot of you have some great observations down, but you haven't quite thought of an inference to write down based off of those observations. So you can take the time to do so now. And I also want you to think about a couple things too as you're taking your observations. What are the things you're starting off with in this setup here? You might want to think about some of the things you can't even see either. Why didn't your balloon get bigger? If it stayed the same, so it looks like they're pretty much the same. Why didn't it get bigger when it gets to time? And the last question is, why is the balloon even inflated at all? So think about these three questions as you're recording new observations and making any new inferences for yourself. Any questions? Yeah, Amy.
So do we have to write down the answers?
No, I want you to talk about them. I'm going to come around. And they might even help you write an inference sheet. So thank you for asking. Let's have your cleanup manager come up and grab your balloon, and you guys can take the observations at your lab stations. Please ignore the laptop for now. Juice maybe? Tea?
Yeah, it is actually kind of cool,
Well, I think that the balloon didn't really inflate more because it has to have pressure to, with that kind of stuff, has to have pressure to expand, and that doesn't give it enough pressure. Like when we blow, we can, like, we have that kind of pressure to make it expand.
So you're saying it kind of takes time. That's great. That's a good inference that maybe it takes
Anything different for you guys here?
it kind of turns.
Kind of what?
Yeah, and it kind of turned a bright yellow.
Okay, so we've got some color changes maybe.
It looks like the yeast is on the bottom.
Do you think maybe the yeast is on the bottom? We guys, everyone agree on that?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's on the bottom?
Because it's heavier within the water.
Maybe that when the water's hot, it raises it up.
What raises it up?
The yeast.
Oh, the yeast is rising.
Or there's more water pressure or something.
Oh, in here?
Yeah.
What about your balloon? Did it change at all?
Not much.
No. How long did it take for your balloon to get inflated like that?
5 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes. So what's the difference between before, like when it was inflated, and after? Where's that gas coming from?
We kind of thought it might have been the warm water, like the steam out of it rising.
Oh, okay. So, but then how come that didn't just happen right away? If it was the warmest, right when you pour the water into there, and then you put the balloon right on top, shouldn't it have just inflated right away then?
No, because the steam might have to like escape out of all the heavier stuff that's on top of it.
So you're saying that there's air inside of here?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of? What do you guys think? Yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe? Well, feel it today. Does it feel warm to you?
No.
So then if there's no warmth, what do you think should happen to that balloon? If we're kind of going with that idea.
Probably deflate.
It would deflate, but it's not deflated, so you think that gas is maybe coming from something else?
No, because once the air got in there, since it's sealed, it can't come out, so it'll just stay like that.
Because the warm air always rises and always rises, so
But then what happens after it's not warm anymore?
there's always like warm. There's probably still warm air up in the balloon.
Well, we're going to talk about that more. I want you guys to think more about maybe like, is there maybe another place that air can come from besides just the fact that there's warm, maybe it's being warmed up?
Maybe that the yeast is on the top, or
Talk about it. Where else can the yeast be, or the air come from?
The yeast. Ow.
I don't know. It's only other place.
That is kind of.
Maybe it has something to do when the yeast mixes with the water.
So you saw some bubbles. You make sure you share that out with the class today too when we're talking about observations. Right? Anything else that you?
well, we were looking at how it's separated. We all kind of noticed that right away.
Yeah. What do you think those separations are made up of?
I'd say the water and like the cornstarch.
Oh, the starch that I use. Yeah. Possibly. What about the yeast? Where does the yeast kind of fit in? Does it fit in there?
It could be kind of
Mushed up or mixed up in there. So what are you guys saying about this air that's in here? Where's that coming from? You can read your inferences. Like I said, you guys all can have different ones here. Let's start off with Drew. What do you have?
Well, for my inferences, I said the yeast will slowly rise, filling up the balloon.
Okay. The yeast is bubbling up. So you're saying the yeast is inside of this balloon right here? You cut it open and you see some yeast, maybe?
Maybe, but I think like when the yeast was pushing up, it was pushing like the air into the balloon.
Oh, so this amount of air here is being pushed here? So you think that if we let this sit for longer, you don't think that balloon will get bigger? No. But how come when you put everything in there, like let's say you put the water and the starch and the yeast in there, and you put the balloon on right away, did you see it inflate right away?
Not really. It took like a minute for it to start getting a little bit bigger.
Okay, so is there maybe another explanation for where that air is coming from besides maybe being pushed into there? Can air be coming from somewhere else? What do you have on?
I think the air, whatever it is coming from the yeast making some sort of reaction with the starch and water.
So it's making some kind of a reaction. So you're saying the yeast is making that gas?
Because when you put yeast in bread to make it rise, and it kind of puts little air pockets in the bread, so sort of like that.
Great, and you know what, make sure you share that one with the class too, because that's a great example. And are you guys kind of focusing on why are things that? Oh, what are some things that maybe you start off with that maybe you can't see that we put together here?
The yeast is completing extracellular digestion, and that's creating gases to inflate up the balloon. And why it wasn't inflated yesterday is because it probably takes
a bit of time to
or a lot of heat because bread cooks in a matter of hours, minutes, something, and it inflates.
Bread takes a while.
So, and we think that the whole flask is full there because when you freeze a balloon, it doesn't deflate.
It just stays in the balloon or down here.
The flask had to fill up with air before the balloon would fill up.
Yeah.
Or
that takes time.
the yeast is making the air go up somehow. It's making air pretty much.
Yeah.
But the evidence is that it does not, it's still 100 milliliters. It hasn't moved.
Yeah, so it's not evaporation because there's still the same amount of water, starch, and yeast.
Until we mix it up, we noticed that there's like a lot of starch on the bottom, and then there was like the water on top. And so we kind of thought that maybe since the starch might be heavier, so it kind of sank to the bottom, but we're not quite sure.
Okay. Well, what does that have to do with yeast, though? Do you think that affects the yeast at all?
Well, the starches went to the bottom when the yeast also goes to the bottom too.
Everyone knows
because starches have more food.
Oh, so they go where the food source is?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're looking at this stuff here, where do you think the yeast is in that?
The bottom.
The very bottom?
Mixed in with the water.
So they're kind of mixed in? Okay. What do you think it's doing with all that stuff? Why is it kind of mixed in there? What's it doing?
Growing.
Growing? Is there any evidence that you can see grow?
No. Wait. Well, the water level is like rising.
The water level what?
Grown.
Oh, the water level seems like it's gotten more. So there's more stuff. Maybe that's evidence for yeast growing, possibly. Great. What about this balloon here? Was that inflated for you guys yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it about the same?
Yeah. It's a little fuller.
How come you think it's the same? What did you predict yesterday? Did you think it was going to get bigger? No. Not really? Why not? I'm not explaining it.
It just didn't seem like it's growing any bigger.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's causing it to grow?
We think that the yeast sensing in the liquid is like making air kind of going up.
So then why is it that it's not making any more, you think?
Because there's no room left.
There's no room left, but there's plenty of room. Isn't there a lot of room in this balloon? Have you ever blown up like a really big balloon before it pops? Yeah, so there's probably a lot.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of air in the flask. Like there's only that much air.
Why is that important though?
Because like when we blow up the balloon, we just keep taking breaths to get more air, but that can only have a limited supply of air.
What has a limited supply of air?
Inside the flask. So.
But why is that important? Why is the amount of air in there important to start off with?
Well, if there's like only a certain amount of air, it's kind of the same thing if you just took like one breath into a balloon. It won't grow anymore, but...
Let's talk about where's this air coming from then? Is that air just there? Is it being made? Because she talked about how that air is coming from the yeast. So are you saying that there's only a certain amount of air that the yeast can use? Or is there something else?
Well, maybe the yeast isn't like, because you know when you're blowing up a balloon, you have to blow really hard to get it past, this stage.
Yeah, you're right.
So maybe it just can't release the air hard enough to get it bigger.
So, okay, so there's just not enough air that's being released to blow this up more?
Yeah.
It was like stuck on the top.
Okay, so what do you notice about like the balloon or anything else today? It didn't grow it didn't get any bigger at all? Why not? What did you think? Did you think it was going to get bigger?
Yeah.
Maybe.
So why? Why do you think it maybe didn't get bigger.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a good, that's definitely a good inference. Can you share that out with the class too later? Put a little star by it. Well, I would love you. That's a great inference. Maybe that's a right. Just put a little star there. Write that down because that's a really great one to figure out. So we've got maybe not using any more of the nutrients that are in there, or it stopped using some of it. That's great. Anything else?
So what are you saying?
It takes. Did it grow?
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, like when you blow a balloon, you know how it's hard.
Yeah. So it takes a lot, yeah. A lot of
It might just all be mixed up in there.
I wonder if you put cold water in it since we put hot water in it.
Well, now it's cold. Because I'm guessing this probably didn't
Well, it's
have
because this is
heat or-
trapped in there. If you let this out, put the balloon on there and shake it, probably won't go.
Yeah.
But since this is all trapped in there, there's no way to escape. Only through the balloon, and it's trapped in
And
there.
I'm guessing the yeast might have died off because I'm not sure if they have the heat on during the night or not.
Yeah, maybe they need hot water. If they use cold water, then maybe it's when it blow up.
Yeah, but we used hot yesterday.
Yeah, now it's
But,
cold.
yeah.
So that might be a reason why it's not.
Because there's nowhere for it to go, just in this balloon. That's why it's still puffed up.
Yeah.
bottom and the water is floated to the top and separated from the yeast.
Okay.
So we're assuming that as an inference that the chemical reaction is over.
You're assuming that the chemical reaction is over. Why?
Because the balloon hasn't inflated at all, and the water level hasn't changed, or the yeast
What
water
does
mix.
this have to do with the chemical reaction?
Like when the chemical reaction was happening, the yeast water mix released some gases that inflated the balloon.
Okay, so it's releasing. So now you're saying that it's stopped releasing gas.
It stopped because this is the same way it was yesterday.
Why do you think that the reaction is over though?
Because we can't see any, there were bubbles rising to the, there was a lot of foam and bubbles, that sort of stuff, rising to the top of the mixture. But this time we just see this like little,
But why did the yeast stop making bubbles then?
it ran out of carbon or whatever gas it had inside it.
It ran out of whatever gas. What kind of gas do you think was probably in there to start off with?
My dad. I am not sure.
What do you guys think, Brian? When we created this little setup here, what are some of the things we put into this? We put water in there, yeah. Anything else?
Right, hot water.
Hot water, yeast, anything else?
Did you put like stars?
Yeah. So we put that. Is there anything else that maybe we added, but we didn't know we added? We just can't see it.
Well, maybe like the air.
What was that? How can you guess that? Oxygen in the air. So maybe we've got some oxygen in there too. So maybe put those two ideas together. We got oxygen in there, and then think about why is it that they stopped producing bubbles? Maybe is there something that's running out? Think about that. I've got to kind of go around to this group.
Some of our observations. What do you think? What are some things that you saw happening? Can you talk about yesterday's observations and then today's observations? Yeah, Alex.
Well, yesterday there were a lot of bubbles in the solution and the balloon was filling up. And today the balloon is the same size and it looks like the yeast is separated from the solution.
Great, let me ask this again. So a lot of bubbles when yeast was mixed in. And you said a lot of things. So a lot of bubbles produced. You said the balloon filled up. So today, the same size. saw some separation. Any others that we can add to this? Yeah, Joey.
Our yeast head sank to the bottom.
The yeast, do you know that for sure?
Well, like we didn't see any within like the liquid, and there was a lot of the yeast and some of the starch liquid that had come down with it.
Okay, so a lot of the stuff was kind of in the bottom, so I'm going to put separation inside the flask stuff at the bottom. Anything else? I know you guys have a lot of great observations, but yeah. Or you should have a lot of.
Yesterday the balloon was not inflated and today was, so we were inferring that yeast takes time to complete extracellular digestion.
Oh, great. So we had yesterday balloon wasn't inflated. Let's come back to that in just a little bit. What about any other observations or inferences that you can share? Even thinking about some of these questions I asked, like, let's start off with, for those of you who saw, how many of you saw that the balloon was inflated yesterday? How many of you saw that it stayed the same? Why? What are some ideas? Yeah, Joey?
Because the yeast probably had got all the nutrients that it needs, so it stopped like producing air, so the balloon just stayed the same.
Interesting idea, yeah. So we've got, today the balloon is the same size. If we go with that idea, maybe we've got the yeast. You said the yeast is maybe producing the gas. And once the yeast gets enough nutrients, stop producing gas. Great. Any other ideas? Yeah, Ollie?
Well, I'm thinking maybe because the balloon, the gas filled up the space the empty space that the balloon already had, but it wasn't strong enough to expand the rubber.
Expand the bubbles from where?
No, the balloon. It wasn't strong enough to expand like the rubbery stuff in the balloon.
Okay, so then where's that gas coming from, you think?
The reaction that it's getting from the starch when it's heated.
Okay, so you're saying the gas in the balloon is caused by some kind of a reaction? Between what?
The starch and the yeast.
What about some of the other things that maybe we started off with in here? You guys saw that I added starch and warm water, and you added yeast. Is there anything else maybe that is present that we just can't see or we just don't know of? Amy?
Oxygen, because there is still more space in the flask before we put the balloon on.
Yeah, and so maybe we start off with some oxygen in there. Do you think that maybe what about the oxygen is making this happen maybe? Any ideas? Do you think oxygen is maybe reacting with something? Possibly. Put a little bit more oxygen. Somehow? Yeah.
Well, actually it was like maybe like the steam, like the hot water usually like steam. But didn't follow with that because it made us go to the balloon and filled that up with the hot air.
Oh, so you're saying the air in here, because it was kind of warmed up from that liquid, it was being pushed into this area?
Yeah.
It's a good question, but then now if you feel it's cold, shouldn't that kind of air not be in this balloon anymore?
Maybe it's like trapped in there because hot air always rises.
Yeah, but hot air
Never
has to maybe stay hot to rise. So maybe we're talking about something else too. So we're going to be talking about some of these inferences that you guys came up with. These look great. What do you notice between, when you're looking at this bag here of strawberries and this bag of like bell peppers, do you notice any similarities here? Yeah.
They both have like a deep mossy green color.
Okay. Well, what about, let's have somebody come up here and just kind of fill the bags here. Ransom, come on. We use one of our other senses. So fill the balloon. Yeah, what does that feel like?
It's kind of firm, but not squishy.
Yeah, what's in there, you think?
The gas.
Okay, fill this bag. Let's go above it, maybe. Yeah, because we're here, we're not really feeling like the part of it. Okay, and fill this back here. What do you notice about that?
They're both inflated.
They're both inflated.
They're all three inflated.
Huh, okay, thanks. So, what can we say about fungi in general? We know that they're provided with food and they can do extracellular digestion. What else can we say about fungi? What else do they do besides extracellular digestion? Talk with the person next to you, find the answer. So let's hear some ideas. What is happening between these two bags? What's similar between these two bags? Patrick?
Well, like with the strawberries and the bell pepper, the bag got inflated, and with the yeast, the balloon got inflated.
Great. So we know that both of these are fungi, right? And we know that they're both doing extracellular digestion. And what are they getting out of extracellular digestion? Yeah, Lucy.
Sugars and nutrients.
Sugars and nutrients for what reason? For energy, great. So we know that we're getting some kind of, the fungi are using energy. And then and we also know from what Patrick said is we've got some gas being produced here too. So we see something else happening here besides just extracellular digestion. We're seeing a different process, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here. So we're going to kind of break down all the things that are happening here in stages, sort of. So if you need more room too, you can also write it this way. So you can have, we're going to talk about 3 different stages. So if you want to write it this way, you can. Or I'm going to try to fit it into this here, so I have these stages here. What's going on with the first stage? What's the fungi or the yeast doing? Are you just stretching?
No, I'm trying to think.
Okay. Yeah, Joey.
It's causing the balloon to inflate.
Well, let's even break it down before that. What is the fungi doing specifically before we even get this happening? Yeah. Joey.
Gathering nutrients or devouring nutrients.
Yeah, what's that process called? Do you remember? Or maybe somebody can help us out. Troy. Yeah, so we've got this first stage, extracellular digestion. Great. Let's add that. So what's happening with extracellular digestion? What's the main part? This is kind of a review. You guys know. Yeah, Patrick.
The fungi are releasing enzymes, and then the enzymes break down the sugars.
Break down sugars?
Yes.
Anything you're missing?
They break down the starches and the sugars.
Great, so I'm going to draw that here. So we've got an arrow here. The mushroom is releasing enzyme into the wood. And the wood is made up of some kind of complex sugar, or you can also say carbohydrate. And I'm going to draw kind of a zoomed in view of what those complex carbohydrates look like inside of the wood here. So if you want to, just make sure you're visualizing this. Just color for that too. Yeah, Joey.
It's reproducing.
It's reproducing? Well, not quite yet. We've got, well, after it has the sugar, it's just kind of hanging out there. What does that mushroom have to do, or the fungi have to do, after they've broken down everything? Yeah, Lucy.
They have to absorb the sugar so they're fermented.
Great, yes. You know what I'm going to add to this? I'm going to add this. This is happening outside the cell. Because we talked about it being extracellular, so outside of the cell. Now we've got something happening through the membrane.
This is stage 3 now.
I'm going to draw a picture too. Cell membrane. We know that the sugars are going to be inside of the cell, because now we've got the sugars. That's why they're being broken down so that the fungi can use the sugars. And we talked about how that those sugars are going to be, we're going to be getting energy from the sugars. So this last stage is something called cellular respiration. Can you guess why it might be called respiration? Yeah, you
Well, respiration for like us is breathing. Maybe that's where the gas is coming from. And
Yeah,
then-
maybe. So that's kind of how you can think of this. We know this is happening inside the cell, and we know we're getting some kind of gas out of it as well. Great. So remember when we did photosynthesis that we kind of wrote out an equation for photosynthesis where we had energy from the sun, we had water and carbon dioxide, and we said those produce sugars and oxygen. You guys know that? We're going to do kind of the same thing here where we're going to write kind of an equation. I'm going to write them kind of underneath the stages here so that way, well actually, yeah, I'm going to kind of write them underneath the stages here so that way you can kind of see what's required for extracellular digestion and how do we get to this part here where we end up with gas and energy. So we're going to start off with, we know we have the complex carb, so, or you can say starches or whatnot, so the complex carb. When you're looking at this here, the setup here, or you're looking at a mushroom in the forest, or you're looking at mold growing on some of our fruits, we're really seeing kind of a 3-step process or 3 stages here that are taking place.